Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 26th of October, comes to you from London. And the market seesawed again yesterday. We saw that Wall Street actually closed higher. The Nasdaq up 3%, having been down over nearly 5% the day before. So we're seeing almost a sort of 5 steps forward, 5 steps down, 3 steps up, if you like. So we're seeing the markets just really going through this turmoil. The dollar is down slightly today, but still looking bullish on all three time frames now. The euro also looking bearish against the dollar and sinking lower. So that theme is still um, a factor. Strong dollar, weak euro. The dollar against the yen is actually down, but still looking bullish, medium and long term. Sterling actually up a little bit this morning, but fell heavily yesterday at that 128 level. So we're down to 128.19 now. So we are seeing downside targets on sterling quite worrying. And if we fall below the level we saw in August, that would activate some very big downside targets. So we need to keep an eye on that. Uh, Pound against the euro is actually up this morning, so it has a slight upper hand, but we are still bearish on that short-term chart. And against the Swiss franc, we're at 128, so sinking lower. And against the Aussie dollar, 182, also just bearish in the short term. Bitcoin, little change this morning, so again, not much action there. Looking at the S&P 500 index, we see the recovery yesterday, this bounce on the lagging line, but the reality is it's now bearish medium term. We've activated this downside target of 11%. We've still got on the short term chart a downside target of around 10%. So markets do still have that capability. We might see some bear closing today, a relief rally, but the reality is the charts are fundamentally changing. The Nasdaq equally, we've got downside targets now. The short-term chart of 3.4, 8.8%. So we are seeing that settling in, and also this downside of 14 and 14%, 15%. What's interesting here is this target is activated by this move down, a relief rally, and then a move to a lower low. Classic Dow theory, that's what generates the downside target. Remembering this is my long term, my medium term, and my short term chart. Taking a look at the Dow, we see here that the Dow is actually just turning bearish on the short term, on the medium term chart, and we've got a downside target here of 11% as well. The Russell 2000 actually recovered 2% yesterday. This is the broad-based US index, but reality is this has actually looked bearish for several weeks now, and we've been through the cloud and made the lower lows first. So the breadth was indicating just from looking at this index that the majority of stocks were making lower lows. And again, we've got downside targets of 17, 18% here. So the smaller caps really badly hit. The S&P future is actually down about 0.5% this morning. We'll need to see how that develops through the day, but we do have downside targets here, of course. And as with the Nasdaq chart, the Nasdaq E-mini is down 0.75% this morning, and the chart's looking very similar. Downside targets here of 4, 12%. 12% here, 12% there. So we are seeing, and the cash market's some 10%, the future's saying 12%. We are seeing that kicking in. The futures on Europe this morning down 0.75% on the FTSE and nearly 1% on the DAX. Looking to Asian markets, Japan down 1/3%, the Hang Seng down just under 1%, and the Shanghai Composite, which really has tumbled this year, down 2/3%. The Indian market down 1/3%. The Aussie market actually flat. And then if we look at just some of the commodities, Brent crude heading lower, down this morning again, just 2/3%. And really just still in bearish mode short term, as with West Texas. Gold is just pushing that bit higher, up very slightly this morning, but gold is actually looking bullish on the chart, and entering a new phase. While markets are turning over and turning bearish, gold is turning up and turning bullish. It's just that simple. We're seeing a move to safe haven, and silver looking a bit better as well, and U.S. Treasury yields heading lower, down at 3.1% today. That's the first time we've been at these levels really this month, and it's the Fed are pricing in basically. The markets are pricing in that the Fed now possibly won't raise rates with this turmoil going on in the markets. So here we see the falls. The Nikkei down 0.4%, looking very bearish on the chart. This data all coming from Yahoo Finance, of course. The Hang Seng down just under 1%, and the Shanghai Composite down 2/3%. Um, and we're seeing here just again markets generally down. The Aussie market up slightly, and the New Zealand market up slightly, but everywhere else in Asia we're seeing falls. Taking a look at the Nasdaq, the Nasdaq actually rose quite strongly yesterday. We had Google up 4%, but they disappointed after hours with their results and fell 7-8% in after hours trading, as did Amazon. So we've seen recoveries here, but these stocks are probably going to get hit again today. A lot of high expectations for Amazon did produce really very strong results, $2.9 billion for the quarter, but the reality is they're falling away. So we're seeing that there. Apple also just only up 2%, but still holding on to its gains there. Facebook recovered back above the 150 mark, but looking still very vulnerable to big falls. And if we look at just some of the other names, Tesla actually up 9%. They're now starting to look very strong. A very strong week for Tesla here. You can see that in the weekly candle. And then looking at Netflix, they were up 3.6%. And Microsoft up 5.8%. So we are seeing some pretty big moves there across the board. In India, in Australia, first of all, we have Fortescue Metals up 5%. Saw some quite big moves here. So interesting that the Aussie market closed flat, but we've got some big performances to the upside. And then if we go the other way, we've got some big falls to the downside. Primary healthcare down 7%. So any slight disappointment is actually producing big falls in the stocks. Main Pharma Group down 5.8%. And so interestingly, we're just seeing all these charts and then the downside targets. So the key thing is to just take a look at your own stocks and see how they're faring. The Nifty 50 in India, again, a similar picture. Tata Motors up nearly 4%. India Bulls, which has been a big faller of late, a little bit of a relief rally of 3.4%, but still a terrible looking chart. And then looking at Titan, they were up 3% in India. The other end of the index, banks headed pretty much lower, nearly 6% lower on Yes Bank. And again, a lot of these stocks thinking the HCL, Axis Bank, Infosys, Tata Consultancy Services, all quite big fallers to around 2%. So Indian stocks having a bit of a time of it there. Here we see the Chinese market, and again, it's just a case of a handful of stocks up, more stocks falling. If we look at the laggards here, quite a lot more stocks falling. Hang Seng, much the same picture. And if we look at the fallers in the Hang Seng, we see we've got things like Sun Optical down 10%. Some very big falls here. China Life down 6%. Looking to Tokyo, similar picture. Some quite good Hitachi up, say 2%. Some quite good performances to the upside, but then looking at the downside, again 6% lower. Showa Denku, Tokai. So we're seeing a lot of movement to the downside there. Anyway, that's it for today. Have a great weekend. Let's hope for a better week next week. Until then, happy charting. See you then.